Hello, everyone. My name is Alvaro Rodriguez. I'm coming to you. I've joined from Houston, Texas. We're having a heat wave right now. I hope you're in a cool place. The topic today of this National Marxist class is this morning is on dialectics of struggle. This is just to get our overview going. Um, we're going to be going into this class with going from about from now till about 10:30, 10:45, at which time I will stop and we'll get you'll have an opportunity to ask some questions, and then later I'll get into part two, and then we'll also get into responding to these questions before we go into part two, and then after part two, then we'll have some time for some questions and comments, and then we're going to have a lunch break at what's going to be Eastern time is 12:30, and then we'll resume with another class at 1 o'clock. So let me go ahead and start my show here. I have a slideshow for you today, and let me stop sharing my camera. Okay, and the slideshow is going to be on the dialectics of struggle, how change happens, theory and practice in two parts, and hopefully you'll find this of use in your struggles. Okay, so by way of a disclaimer, let me just say that I'm a retired mechanical engineer who worked in the petrochemical industry for over 40 years. So now you know what my background is and where I'm coming from. As an engineer, engineering is the application of science in production. In my case, it was the design of mechanical equipment such as pressure vessels, corrosion prevention, material selection, failure analysis. So engineering results prove the truth of science and the scientific method. Certainly proves that to me. I lean heavily on science, and on my slides, I tend to go too deeply into the material or take off on tangents without slides, so apologies beforehand. I am an activist in Texas politics for over 40 years, and the practice examples that I have available come from my own experience. So what are some of the class norms for today? First of all, this class is too short for the purpose. It can only provide an overview. So be kind, we're all learning together. Hopefully it will encourage you to read more on your own and discuss further in your district, club, or study group. Application in struggle, that is practice, is necessary in order to learn how to use Marxist dialectics. So you're not going to learn it. I mean, you're not going to know it from a class. I recommend that you do some of your own reading. Just don't take my word for what dialectics is about. I would suggest you read Ludwig Feuerbach and the End of Classical German Philosophy by Friedrich Engels. And the other book that I find very useful and very easy to understand is Materialism and the Dialectical Method by Maurice Cornforth. It's a little dated, but still very applicable. And both of these publications are readily available on the internet. You can download them and use them. So what do we expect to share today? In part one, which goes from actually 11 to 11:30 Eastern time, we're going to talk about the dialectics of struggle, the theory. And then we're going to go in questions and answers from 11:30 to 11:45 Eastern time, and then we'll go into part two, which goes from 11:45 to 12:15 Eastern time on how to perform Marxist analysis, examples of how you can use the dialectical struggle in practice. Then we go into some questions and answers and comments from 12:15 to about 12:30. Then we're going to take a lunch break for 30 minutes, and then we'll come back with another class at 1 o'clock Eastern time. So this is one of my favorite cartoons. Here is an example of a conventional activist stating that don't bother me now, I have a war to fight. When presenting new ideas, they're not readily accepted. Some of us prefer to use conventional wisdom or common sense, old techniques to struggle, and they're not as effective as some of the new way of thinking. So why do we need dialectics of struggle, you may ask? Marxist dialectics provides us an advantage. And what are those advantages? First of all, it is more difficult to influence positive change in society without an understanding of what society is and how it changes. So we need to understand these in order to make positive change in society. We want to influence. Yes.
Are you still on slide 1?
I'm sorry?
Are you still on slide, the opening slide?
No, I'm on slide 7.
But your slides are not moving.
That I don't understand. Let me see. Let's try it again. Okay. All right. Let's try that again. Sorry about that. Can you see my first slide now?
I see your opening slide.
Okay. Let me see if the next slide comes on. I'm sorry about that. Can you see that?
I see only the opening slide.
Oh, only the opening slide. Okay. Not the following slide.
Only the opening slide.
I see. Okay. How about now? Can you see a slide?
Only the opening slide. I will let you know when it changes.
Okay.
But you might need to. It's not moving, so you might need to.
Okay. Let's try next. How about there? No. Okay. Alrighty, that's very strange why it's not working. Okay, let's try something else. Okay. Sorry about that. Any change?
No.
Okay.
So you might want to shut down, come out of the system, go out of the system, and come back in. Sorry,
Okay.
everyone, but so just leave, come back in.
Okay, not sure how to do that.
Just go out, just as if you're leaving the GoToWebinar system.
Okay.
And come back. There it is. It moved.
Okay. All right. Let's pause. So
it moved to it says 3, number 3.
Yeah,
it says right. Class norms.
Okay. Now it says it. Okay. Yeah. All right. That was just a problem with the operator here. Sorry about that. Let's see if okay, as I was saying, I'm on 3. Let me just go to the second one, previous one. Sorry about the interruption. Can you see slide number 2 now?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. As I was saying, it looks like my slides were not moving. I'm sorry about that. As I was saying, as a disclaimer, I'm a retired mechanical engineer who worked in the petrochemical industry for over 40 years. Engineering is the application of science in production. And in my case, it was the design of mechanical equipment such as pressure vessels, corrosion prevention, material selection, failure analysis. And what this shows, engineering results prove the truth of science and the scientific method. I lean heavily on science and on my slides, and I tend to go too deeply into the material and take off on tangents with slides. Apologies beforehand. And I have been an activist in Texas politics for over 40 years, and the practice of examples come from my own experience. Okay, I hope we're in slide 3 now. Class norms. What I was saying here is that the class is too short for the purpose. It can only provide an overview. So, and we're all learning together, so be kind. Hopefully, it will encourage you to read more on your own and discuss further in your district, club, study group. Application and struggle is necessary in order to learn how to use Marxist dialectics. So some of the recommended readings include Ludwig Feuerbach and the End of Classical German Philosophy by Friedrich Engels. And the other one is Materialism and the Dialectical Method by Maurice Cornforth. As I was saying earlier, Maurice Cornforth's book on Materialism and the Dialectical Method was written some time ago, but it's still a very clear reading on dialectics, the dialectical method. We were talking also earlier about what to expect to share today. The first part is on the dialectics of struggle, and those will go from actually 11 to 11:30 Eastern time. It's ongoing now, and then we're going to go to questions and answers at about 11:30, and that'll go on till about 11:45. Part 2 will start approximately around 11:45 to 12:15, and that includes a review of how to perform a Marxist analysis, examples of how you will use the dialectics of struggle in practice, and then we will go into another session of questions and answers from about 12:15 to 12:30. Then we're going to break for lunch, and after lunch, then we will have a new presentation at 1 o'clock Eastern time. So we should now be in slide number 6 on a cartoon showing a conventional activist who states, "Don't bother me now. I have a war to fight." Some activists are find it difficult to learn new stuff or bother with new stuff, or don't understand how a new way of looking at things will improve their work. They're still thinking in terms of conventional wisdom and common sense, but that would only take you so far. You do need a new tool to how you look at the world, and that tool is dialectical materialism. So why do we need dialectics of struggle? Marxist dialectics provides us with an advantage. First of all, it's more difficult to influence positive change in society without an understanding of what society is and how it changes. We want to influence positive change for the betterment of the working class and the well-being of all working people. Therefore, we need dialectics of struggle. Other reasons that we need the dialectics of struggle, this will include we must make deductions in Marxist analysis in order to move the struggle forward from basic science, not from memorized formulas, inapplicable experience, or capitalist philosophy. Another reason is we will be able to do scientific analysis, develop strategies and tactics, and near future forecasting, predicting, for example, future issues, future union organizing, future voting patterns, electoral reform, future political and economic conflicts. So we will be able to do this analysis in near future forecasting. This is very important because it gives you an advantage. Maurice Cornforth in the publication I mentioned earlier, entitled Materialism and the Dialectical Method, states it very well. Quote, "We need a revolutionary weapon of the working people, an instrument, a method for understanding the world so as to change it," end of quote. A rational scientific worldview makes it harder to derail us ideologically. Capitalism tries everything to pull us away from struggle. So in understanding new concepts and theory, and by theory we mean generalization of practice, that's it. It's hard. Karl Marx in Capital Volume 1 states, and I'm quoting, quote, "There is no royal road to science, and only those who do not dread the fatiguing climb of its steep paths have a chance of gaining its luminous summits," end of quote. So the main idea here is do not give up on the study of Marxist philosophy. So why science? Why Marxist philosophy? First of all, science helps us to understand the world and provides us the information to change nature, assist in positive human development. We get an advantage when the scientific method is applied to society, and we call that, we Marxists call that dialectical materialism, historical materialism. By knowing the laws of nature and human development, we can see further and struggle better with long-term results. So the main idea is not enough to know the world. The idea is to change, the issue is to change it. The objective is to place knowledge at the service of social and economic equality and ending exploitation. So what is Marxist dialectics not about? It is not a dogma. It is evidence-based, scientific, rational, systemic thinking. It is continuously changing based on new evidence and practice. It rejects utopianism and other forms of philosophical idealism. Marxism values practice as proof of theory, evidence-based theory. It is not mechanical. It is not formal logic, which regards things as fixed, motionless, and absolute. Marxism is not limited by simple common sense or pragmatic empirical thinking. It goes beyond this forms of materialism to the realm of dialectics, by which we mean nonlinear dynamic development. So it's always in motion. What else do we need? Why else do we need the dialectics of struggle? Because capitalists are self-serving owners who exploit and control every aspect of our social lives. Because capitalists do not want change. Change threatens their privileged positions of personal wealth from the exploitation of workers. They are conservative because they need to conserve the status quo. Status quo meaning the way things exist right now, which is an exploitive system. Another reason that we need dialectics is because capitalists manufacture consent to their corporate-owned mass media, the content in form of movies and art, think tanks, education curriculums, political systems, and other manners. So therefore, we have to counter this. Another reason that we need the dialectics of struggle is because capitalists lie. One of the big lies is that nothing really changes, making it appear as though progressive, socialist, communist, social change, or revolution is unobtainable. They use all their powers of persuasion and compulsion to make us believe that capitalism is all there is, that it is human nature and nothing more, that the capitalist mode of production is the end of history. So the main idea is this: as we try to gain economic and social justice, it is important to understand which class interest is holding back progress. We must understand that class struggles are helping create positive change, that we must engage in struggle. We need Marxist philosophy to make sense of concrete conditions and develop plans for successful struggle. The dialectical materialism is one of three basic foundations of scientific socialism. The other two being political economy, and we will have a class on that next week. And the last one is the theory of socialist revolution. So let's get into exactly what is dialectics. How does change come about? An overview of Marx's dialectical method. First of all, everything is in motion, continuously changing in nature and society. Everything is also interconnected, interactive, and interdependent. Secondly, change is inevitable and is driven by internal inevitable contradictions, opposing stresses. We call this the unity of opposites. And thirdly, change is a process. It does not happen instantaneously. It is not external. It's not accidental, although external factors can play a role. It zigzags and sometimes abruptly. The fact that motion and change are continuous, ever present, and then driven by intrinsically internal stresses and resulting in something new and different is called dialectics. So that's one way of putting it. Another way is dialectic materialism has always been defined has sometimes been defined as the world outlook of the Marxist-Leninist Party. So in society, Marxists call it historical materialism. Marx introduced practice as a criterion of truth in society. Marx stated that, quote, the question whether objective truth can be attributed to human thinking is not a question of theory, but is a practical question. We must prove the truth, end of quote. So the main idea here is to keep in mind that truth is always incomplete. It improves as we have better data, evidence, and experience or practice. So the truth, you heard the expressions, the truth shall set you free and truth to power. So those are the main ideas here. So what did Lenin have to say on the dialectics of Marx and Engels? Lenin stated that dialectics is nothing more nor less than the scientific method in sociology, just what I've said earlier. which consists in regarding society as a living organism in a constant state of development. The study of which requires an objective analysis of the relations of production which constitute the given social formation and an investigation of its laws of functioning and development. So this is a longer definition, but those are all elements of dialectics. So what did Engels have to say about dialectics? Engels defines dialectics as a philosophy of science, history, and nature in its full development with its interconnections, and it is nothing more than the science of the general laws of motion and development of nature, human society, and thought. Engels says that the laws of dialectics are abstracted from the history of nature and human society. So is the world knowable? Can we tell what the truth is? One common characteristic of the Trump administration was a total disregard for science. Trump and his cohorts lived in a quote unquote an alternative reality where falsehoods were true, alternative facts were widespread, there was no pandemic, and there was no climate change. Trump was not constrained by any evidence. Trump, Republicans, and corporate Democrats said that they wanted to make working families. They wanted to help working families. They lied. What they did was to give huge tax cuts to wealthy people and large corporations. Yes, the world is knowable. Remember early years when we did not know the role of oxygen? Now we know what oxygen is. How many lives were saved? How many lives were saved during the COVID-19 pandemic using oxygen ventilators? So science and understanding knowledge does help. And yes, truth can be determined by an evidence-based method. The scientific method uses evidence to support or reject a hypothesis or belief. We know better when we have better data. So the main idea is get to know nature and society better in order to change it. We can become an agent of positive change with better knowledge. So what is the scientific method? The scientific method is a method that has completely changed human society. It's been around for hundreds of years. The scientific method is a way to prove or disprove a hypothesis or what we call arriving at the truth. Currently, we use the term fact-based or evidence-based truth. Non-Marxist methods include speculating, making things up, that is lying, alternative facts, Trump-type behavior. Is the scientific method only applicable to nature? No, it applies to society as well. Remember, we're part of nature. Here's one way to describe the steps in the scientific method for those of you that don't recall from your classroom studies. First, develop a working hypothesis or make objective observations. Produce a statement as to how you think things work. Secondly, design a test, investigation, or observation, for instance, history and society, for your hypothesis. For instance, here's an example. If your hypothesis is that a tree that falls in the forest makes a noise, whether someone is there to hear it or not, then the test would involve A, remotely falling a tree in the forest using a remote explosion or mechanical device, and B, installing a remote microphone to record any possible sound. And thirdly, verify if the test proves the hypothesis or not. If the test validates the hypothesis you may have a conclusion or working theory. The process continues through iteration, which basically says it's informed trial and error. So all processes go through that. Someone once asked, why does it matter if our ideas are scientific or not? If we do not use a method that arrives at the truth, then we will regress as a society. We will fall for any lie or any myth. If we consider that there is no truth, only opinions, and this vary, then we will not make any human progress, as demonstrated in nature. Here's another one of my favorite cartoons. How you can see it on the left-hand side is a march for science. And on the right-hand side is a smaller march for alternative facts led by a figure that looks like Donald Trump. So let's get into one of the first laws of dialectics, which is the law of transformation of quantitative changes to qualitative changes. So what is the difference between quantitative versus qualitative change? Quantitative change is a change without modification. Let's use an example from nature. For instance, a gradual temperature increase in water without a change in state, that is, not changing from a liquid to a gas or to a solid. If we change the temperature of water by heating, then any gradual change in temperature is only quantitative. An example in society would be a single reform is a change without modification of capitalism. Qualitative change is change with modification. An example of a qualitative change occurs if we are going back to our case of water. If we raise the temperature of water by heating above 212 degrees Fahrenheit or 100 degrees centigrade, water will undergo a qualitative change from a liquid to a gas, steam, at this temperature. Another example is reversed. If the temperature is lowered through cooling below 32 degrees or 0 degrees centigrade, then the liquid water will be qualitatively changed to a solid, an ice. An example in society would be a series of reforms. One can result in a qualitative new revolutionary consciousness, a new mass movement that will transform existing society into a new society, socialist society. So the main idea here is that qualitative change arises as a result of an accumulation of quantitative changes. So what is dialectics in human development? Remember, the development is change with modification, change proceeding from its own internal laws from stage to stage. All development takes place through the working out of ever-present internal contradictions. Unity of opposites, well, some of the opposites that we're talking about is, for instance, cold and heat, light and darkness, capital and labor, birth and death, positive and negative, addition, subtraction, north and south. One example in society, electoral popular front or mass movement against the extreme right, working class movement within a dying capitalist system would be an example of unity of opposites. The partial resolution of prior contradictions results in a new stage, a new contradiction, sometimes called negation of the negation or synthesis. This is a partial temporary resolution of a contradiction. Afterwards, new internal contradictions manifest themselves. So the change process is continuous. So contradictions remain and they will always be there. So what are the main drivers for development in society? Changes in the conditions needed for human life. Contradictions is the driving force of change. Remember how change was also imposed in recently on us from a pandemic. Under capitalism, social production by workers, but private appropriation by capitalists. This is the main contradiction of capitalism. Workers produce and capitalists steal the surplus values. The resolution of class conflict through revolution from capitalism to working class power. So what are some of the expressions of non-dialectical thinking? Quote, you probably heard this before, quote, nothing ever changes, end of quote. Quote, capitalism is just human nature. People are naturally greedy, end of quote. Another one is, there is nothing beyond, quote, liberal democracy, end of quote, or a euphemism, which is a euphemism for capitalism. Francis Fukuyama called it, quote, the end of history, end of quote. Another quote is another famous non-dialectical thinking quote is that the more things change, the more they remain the same. So the main idea here is that these non-dialectical expressions are meant to maintain the existing system of social and economic injustice, resulting in the absence of struggle, paralysis from cynicism. Development through unity and struggle of opposites. Nature and history demonstrates that when qualitative change occurs, always present is a struggle of opposites, opposing tendencies, opposite negative, positive forces, old and new within the things and the process concerned. Internal contradictions are inherent in all things, between that which is dying and that which is being born. Here is a graphical example, illustration of nuclear fusion, development from quantitative to qualitative change. So in this particular case, it's an illustration of the method that's been used currently to create fusion energy. The use of different isotopes of hydrogen, for instance, deuterium and tritium, isotopes of hydrogen are put together at very high heat and temperature, and to be able to create transform these isotopes of hydrogen to helium, to shoot off a neutron, split off a neutron, and then create a lot of energy from the difference in mass created during the change process. And the amount of energy that's created from this process is quantified by Einstein's equation, that the loss of mass times the speed of light squared is the amount of energy that's created from this loss of mass in the fusion reaction. And so one translation of that is that 1 gallon of seawater could produce as much energy as 300 gallons of gasoline. So here is a change from one quantity to a different quality. So it changed from isotopes of hydrogen to helium, resulting in a huge release of energy. Here's another infographic of dialectics. This is one that I created. I'm hoping to illustrate it. I'm not sure how helpful it is, but on the y-axis you have spiral development to new heights as a function of time. It indicates there's an arrow of time in history and in nature. And in the x-axis, we have change with development as a function of contradictions in material conditions. So change goes through several gyrations, but it's continuously, the rate of change continuously changing. So we must think in nonlinear dynamic type changes. Dialectics is to math what calculus is to linear algebra. There's a higher form of mathematics, a higher form of thinking in the social sphere. So I hope that helps. I know people will question the arrow of time. We believe that the time is in our favor and it goes in the progressive direction. Martin Luther King described it as the arc of moral universe. It's long, but it bends towards justice. So it's the same basic concept. Some think that revolutionary change is a future point in history. That is not the case. It is a process of undergoing change right now. Revolutionary change is part of a continuous process, and it's happening right now. Revolution is not a future point in history. One expression of the process, the old is dying, but the new has yet to be born, is correct. The main takeaway here is that change and revolution are a continuous process. It never stops, and it's underway right now. So what is political consciousness? How does that come into the equation? In order to effect change, first we must help revolutionize working class consciousness. The working class primarily radicalizes based on its own experience of struggle. In the process of struggling for necessary reforms, we learn who holds real economic and political power. We learn that organized workers engaged in struggle have power. In the process of struggling for reforms, combined with the radicalization of consciousness, plus intensifying internal contradictions in the system, will result in revolutionary change, from quantitative change to qualitative change, from capitalism to socialism. So let's review some of the basic points that we covered this morning. Change with modification is inherent in nature and society, and we call it development. Change with modification is caused by internal contradictions in the system itself, but it can be kindled from outside. We call this continuous process dialectical historical materialism. The dialectics of struggle is helpful towards our goal of a non-exploitative socialist society. The dialectics of struggle is useful in our mass movement. Each of our members is engaged in this dialectic struggle by raising revolutionary consciousness, uniting, energizing, and mobilizing our working class to win our ongoing struggle for socialism. That means winning working class political power. So our strategy and tactics must be informed through theory tested in practice. That's what dialectics is all about. So at this point, it's 11:35. I think we can take on some questions, Dee.
Until what time, Alvaro?
For another about 10, 15 minutes.
Okay, so let me know when you want to. Okay, everyone. Sorry for the technical problem earlier, but we're now, if you would like to introduce a question or a comment, on your control panel, there is a picture of a hand. Use your mouse clicker, your mouse cursor, to click the picture of the hand. That will let us know you want to introduce a question or make a comment, and we'll be able to call on you, and I will open your mic from this end. You will click the picture of, you can actually, if you want to speak, you can actually click the picture of the mic now, and that will open it on your end. So I'm looking for raised hands. I'm looking for raised hands. We will not be able to read any comments that you introduce in the question box. So please verbally introduce your question. And Hobby, your mic is open.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This has definitely got my brain cells moving, Alvaro. Thanks so much for the great presentation. It raises a couple of questions, and I'd just like for you to elaborate on, really, there's two issues. One is, in normal, or what I've learned as scientific method, I was told very clearly that science can never produce a truth, or that is to say, a theory can never be proven; it can only be falsified. And this gets to you. I think it gets to your issue, or what you described as dialectics. As data accumulates, it tends to falsify one paradigm or one model and move to another. And I'm wondering, is dialectics consistent with that type of scientific method, or is that scientific method that I've learned off or wrong somehow? That's the first question.
Okay, so we okay. So please, okay, right. Oh, yeah. Briefly, please.
Okay, the second question is simply, can you expand on the difference between dialectical and historical materialism? I'm kind of unclear on that so far.
Okay, thank you. We're looking for more raised hands. We're going to collect the questions and comments before we turn the mic back over to Alvaro. We're looking through the attendee. Okay, Anthony, your mic is open.
Okay, hello, yeah, thanks. First of all, yeah, thanks for the class here. This is great stuff. My question is more kind of like in practice. We talk about dialectical materialism and everything's constantly changing, but what I kind of see is how people, particularly in the West, are very critical of countries that have already had communist revolutions and how they've had to change in time because, unfortunately, globally, we're still kind of under the pressure of an immense capitalist system. So, we kind of like accept that things go through change and adapt when we haven't yet had a revolution. But then once we have had a revolution, we kind of dismiss any changes that take place as just going back to capitalism. So just kind of wondering, how do we apply dialectical materialism to changes to a society that is trying to move towards socialism, has had a revolution, but is still under the pressures of a global capitalist system?
Okay, thank you. Looking for more raised hands. Looking for more raised hands. Again, we will not be able to read comments in the question box. Bradley, your mic is open. Open your mic on your end. Just click it with the mouse cursor. Open your mic, Bradley Spell. Open your mic on your end. Just click it with the mouse cursor. Okay, we're going to move on.
Sorry about that.
All right. Briefly, please. Briefly, come on. You got it.
So you talk about qualitative change almost as if it's a finish line to be had after quantifiable changes are made in our communities. Is it not a constant changing measure that goes along with each quantifiable progression?
Okay, thank you. Looking for more raised hands. Brian, your mic is open. Brian Davies, your mic is open. Click the picture of the mic on your end to open it. Brian Davies, use your mouse cursor. Okay. Moving on, looking for raised hands. Just a second. Daniel, your mic is open. Open your mic. Danielle, your mic is open. Click your mic on your end to open it. Click the picture of the mic on your end to open your mic. Danielle, if you want to speak, click the picture of the mic on your end to open your mic, and then I will move through. Okay, I'm going to someone who used initials. DD, click the mic. There you are.
Hey there. Thank you for the explanation of the dynamic changes of the arc of history. Can we get a nuanced take on the war in Ukraine? This one's kind of hard to explain from a Marxist perspective. I see different takes, and I would love to hear your take on it. Thank you.
Okay, Alvaro, we're still taking questions and comments.
Yeah, Dee, what did you say you wanted me to respond? Is that after the practice session at the end of the presentation or now?
I think you have to select very wisely what you will respond to.
Okay.
But you need to tell, but did you say we would take more until what time?
Well, actually another 7 minutes, but if I'm going to respond now, I probably have to use those 7 minutes.
Okay, Eric, your mic is open. Eric Tenders, please introduce your brief comment or question.
Yes, I was just wondering if reform is the only, grouping of quantitative reforms is the only way to accomplish qualitative reform, or are there other options?
Okay, thank you, Eric. We'll take one more, Alvaro. Eric Ramos, your mic is now open. Open your mic on your end. Click the picture of the mic with your mouse cursor, with your mouse clicker. Eric Ramos, your hand is up. We're calling on you now. There you are.
Mm-hmm. Here I am. Yeah, this is Eric. I just, I jumped on recently and I was listening to some comments about, dialectical materialism and historical materialism. And I just want to say that that this way of thinking really encapsulates all sorts of, progress isn't linear, right? There's a lot of back and forth, and that's just as it is in nature. Before a new iteration of something comes out, there will be many different attempts to create something that can adapt to new changes, that is trying to solve a problem. And that's the same thing that happens. Like when feudalism became capitalism, there was many different kinds of societies that tried to form up, and all of that. So like all of these different things, when we see socialist countries try to make these attempts, they're starting from where they're at, doing the best that they can. And of course, there's going to be failures, but eventually it's the natural sort of destination for where everything is going. Sorry, I'm at my son's soccer game. All right, I'm done.
Are you speaking? Okay, it seems that we have lost that person. So Alvaro, if you want to take the floor, please
Okay.
do. And
All right.
then go into your next session.
All right. Dee, there's some very good questions and real good comments that came from our audience. They obviously listen attentively and very thoughtfully. Hobie asked some good questions about the scientific method. Can it produce a truth? Well, I'm an engineer, and so I'm a very practical person, and I know the scientific methods has come up with basic truths that, to an engineer, are adequate enough for us to proceed to produce pressure vessels in other equipment that is very dangerous to human life if we don't believe the truth of this scientific methods and evidence. So I think in reality, it does prove a truth. Obviously, all truth is somewhat relatively and is based and is limited based on our knowledge at the time. But we're learning continuously. I mentioned the iterative process. That is the process of informed trial and error. All change, all new, something new comes through that process. It's not fully formed, and like I said, in every contradiction, it results in a new contradiction, and that has to be worked out over time. So that never stops, and that goes back to the question that was asked by about the ever-changing contradictions, even in social. Once you have a socialist society, it continues to have these contradictions with the global capitalism and within its own society too, and it continues to change. And so change is ever present in every society. There are very dominant contradictions, and there's contradictions that are they're very detrimental. So there's always that struggle going on. And what we're seeing in the Ukraine, I think there's different people have different opinions on what's going on there, but it's a basic contradiction between U.S. imperialism and and what's going on around the world with respect to national sovereignties and the need for the security of other countries, and whether U.S. should remain as supreme like it has since the end of the Second World War. So I'm not going to say that much more about that, but I think that I don't see that it's that complicated. If you're an anti-imperialist, you would understand. If you understand U.S. imperialism, you understand what's happened in Afghanistan. You understand what happened in Iraq and in Libya and in Vietnam and so forth. You should be able to understand what's going on in the Ukraine. I think that Eric mentions that progress is not linear, and that's definitely true. My depiction, my graphic, tries to illustrate that it's not linear. And just because you resolve one set of contradictions doesn't mean that the system doesn't create another set of contradictions. Some of those contradictions can be very antagonistic, and others can be worked out in a different way. So anyway, now I think Hobie was asking the difference between dialectical materialism and historical materialism. The way I see it, it's a dialectical materialism is just the basic philosophy of dialectics applied. When you apply it to history or human society, we just call it historical materialism. And that's when we're using the dialectical method in analyzing human history and how it proceeds, the development of classes and the class struggle and so forth. So I don't think it's much more complicated than that. It's just dialectics applied to human history. Some of these other questions I wasn't clear on them. I didn't understand them that well. But anyway, I think I'm ready to start with the next section. Hopefully, you'll provide some an illustration of the practical application of dialectics. Can I proceed, D?
Please do.
Okay. Okay, so this part 2 of the presentation deals with how to perform Marxist analysis, examples of how you can use the dialectical struggle in practice. I have several examples, but we don't have enough time for that, so I'm just going to give one example and then go on from that. Okay, so where do we start with dialectical analysis, Marxist analysis? Well, the starting point is you have to start with objective reality, truth on facts. So Lenin states that a fundamental thesis of dialectics is truth is always concrete. So don't look for abstract truths, look for concrete truth. And remember the proof of what is true at any given time certainly is whether it's evidence based or not, and it's supported by the evidence. So next we have to not only we start with objective reality, then we have to look at what changes are occurring. So we need to understand what are those changes, and then what are the main contradictions driving social change in my area. So you have to concretize it to your particular area work. So what can we do? We can have broad-based movement politics, revolutionary mass work. And in order to do that, what are the primary contradictions in the system is the first question you have to ask. What reform if one can change the balance of forces and open the possibilities for significant advance? And thirdly, who are the main opponents and possible allies in the struggle to achieve the reform? And fourthly, who has the self-interest to fight for the reform? And you have to assess their organizational level of consciousness and capacity to join in the struggle. So this is some of the practical steps you've got to take in assessing a situation. So what is the process that Marxist analysis developed? The process of Marxist analysis to develop strategy and tactics of struggle using the dialectics of struggle. Firstly, you have to research and collect the evidence. Remember the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, which class, who benefits, what are the primary contradictions, why, changes are underway, what are the trends. Next, we have to identify the functional losses to prioritize our resources. Obviously, we cannot correct all the problems or resolve all the contradictions. We have to prioritize this. What working class function is affected? So in every situation, in every struggle, we have to quantify the losses. Example, human life certainly take priority over life disruptions or lower standard life, or is it a democratic issue? So we have to prioritize our resources, and we need to identify what are the losses, current losses to the working class. Thirdly, we need to perform reverse social engineering, determine what are the causes and effects. Cite the evidence for each, identify effective solutions for each effect to find the most efficient solution. So there's a lot of different causes. We have to look at them and cite the evidence for each, identify effective solutions for each, and then find the most efficient solution. Why are we looking for the most efficient solution? Because we have limited resources and limited attention, limited priority. So we have to be very efficient in the way we struggle. Fourthly, identify systemic root causes and develop priority effective solutions within the context of the class struggle and the struggle for socialism, raising the working class and socialist consciousness, motivating, energizing, mass organizing, winning, political and economic party organizing. And fifthly, increase awareness, prioritize, and engage in collective mass actions. So remember, truth is always concrete. The struggle to increase the minimum wage is an example that I'm going to cite now. That's been going on for 10, 12 years. So here is a graph that shows what has happened to the minimum wage. What are the trends in the minimum wage since the 1930s? The minimum wage went through a rise up until about the 1970s, at which point it started going downward. I'm talking about the real value of the minimum wage. So right now, the minimum wage is at $7.25 an hour, based on 2020 data. Right now, it's 2022 data. It's still $7.25 in a lot of states. If the minimum wage had kept pace with the raise in productivity, the minimum wage should already be in 2020. This is all the data that I have. It should be at $21.50, so it should be much higher even now in 2022. So what happens with the $7.25 an hour? Well, some workers actually make less than $7.25 an hour. Tip workers, for instance, can make less than that. Some of their wages are stolen. Immigrants' wages are stolen outright in many cases. And some states have no minimum wage, and some are lower. Some workers are not covered by the minimum wage, agricultural workers and others. But anyway, what I wanted to show here is the rate of productivity going up and a downward trend in wages not keeping up. Nowadays, there's only another trend underway, and that is the loss. There's a loss of workers in production, and so that's the wages are going up. Because of that, because coming out of the pandemic, there was huge demand for products, pent up demand, and now we're in the middle of a war, and there are certainly there's a rise in oil prices and other disruptions due to the sanctions that have been imposed, and so now we have an inflationary trend, and so the value of the dollar for workers is certainly coming down. So anyway, this is the problem, right? This is the concrete situation. So what are the main contradictions in the struggle to increase wages and unionization? The main contradiction in the class struggle: socialized production and private appropriation of the surplus value created by workers. Capitalists trying to maximize profits, right? Lower wages, higher productivity. That is, productivity means more gadgets per worker, right? More product per worker. Denying workers the right to collective bargaining through a union, what we call neoliberalism, in order to extract more surplus value from workers and to remove that surplus values and acquire it personally, and acquire it privately, I should have said. The pandemic has increased the contradictions, right? Many workers did not return to work after the pandemic layoffs. Pent-up demand after the pandemic has created labor shortages and so forth. The strategy in Texas to end the 15-hour per hour minimum wage. Union priority had to be gained, right, in order to make this a leading struggle. The struggle for an increase in the minimum wage will result in wage increases across the board and furthers the struggle for unionization. That's why the demand was $15 an hour in a union. It was understood that this was going to be a sustained, long-term ideological, political, and economic struggle. Allies were necessary in the community, and that's what happened. Initial struggles focused on large employers such as Walmart, McDonald's, and Amazon. And the campaign for 15 was taken to cities and states. Results now is that 30 states and 40 cities and counties have raised the minimum wage, and half will reach $15 an hour soon, in the next couple of years. This struggle has also affected the national and local election of progressives, socialists, and communists. $15 in a union is now a well-recognized slogan. The wage demand now should go higher because of what's happening in the economy and with the reduction in the value of the dollar. The U.S. House of Representatives have passed a national $15 minimum wage. The struggle now is also for Senate approval. That is going to have to wait a while. Laura Padin, a senior staff attorney at Labor Advocacy Group of the National Employment Law Project, stated, when that campaign started, that is, this campaign to increase the minimum wage in 2012, a $50 minimum wage was considered this pie in the sky type of goal. Now, many of us are thinking that $50 an hour is actually too low and it needs to be much higher. Results of the $50 in a union campaign. Walmart increases wages from $7.25 to $10, 13 average per hour right now. Starting hourly wages at some McDonald's is now 11 per hour or higher. Amazon increases hourly wages to $15 after a lot of publicity and pressure from Senator Bernie Sanders. The struggle for higher wages in Amazon has now turned into a union drive at Amazon. Amazon has 1.3 million workers. After the pandemic, Amazon starts wages at $18 an hour for some workers. The campaign for $15 an hour was taken to cities and states. Results were that 30 states and 40 cities and counties have raised the minimum wage, and half will reach $15 an hour if pressure continues. So here is a quote from Karl Marx in Value, Price, and Profit. Instead of the conservative motto, a fair day's wage for a fair day's work, they ought to inscribe in their banner the revolutionary watchword, quote, abolition of the wage system, end of quote. So that's a quote from Karl Marx. So I think what we can take the rest of the time, D, for additional questions and comments, and maybe we can engage in further discussion.
Okay, Alvaro, so we'll turn it back to you at least 10 minutes before the sure. Time up.
Okay.
Is that good, or should it be 15 minutes?
That maybe 15 minutes before, yeah. That'll be fine.
All right. So the floor is now open for comments and questions. Please indicate you want to speak by clicking the picture of the hand on your control panel. If you want to speak, you may as well click the mic on your control panel now, so that when I open your mic, you will be ready to start. I am now looking for raised hands. Daniel Weinberg, you have the floor.
Okay. I have a question. I have a question about dialectical materialism. I appreciate everything Alvaro is saying about historical materialism. But my question is, what did the Soviet Union do in 1991? Was that an ending of dialectical materialism and into capitalism, or was it something else? Thank you.
Okay, looking for additional raised hands. Looking for raised hands. Anne, you have the floor. Anne Weaver.
Great. Hi. Yes. Thank you so much for all of this. I've been thinking about quantitative versus qualitative change in light of your discussion. And what are your thoughts on the idea of having a union as more of a qualitative change, the spread of unionization, really changing the balance of power between workers and owners, as opposed to owners seeing this sorts of pressure and saying, well, okay, well, for my company, I'll raise the wages to prevent workers from having a union, which is sort of a benevolent owner approach that doesn't change the balance of power in the workforce. I'm just wondering what you think about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Looking for more raised hands. Looking for more raised hands. Just a minute. Cybele.
Hi.
Hi.
Hey, I had a question about dialectical materialism and ways that organizers can work within that. So if this is if you know, the conditions that we're dealing with right now are partially a product of internal contradictions within the system, what can organizers actually do in order to kind of raise class consciousness and try to speed along the process of working towards, you know, a new system, or trying to push people towards a greater deal of class consciousness? I know there's like some disagreement about what some people call accelerationism and whether it's productive to kind of push towards the ending kind of catastrophe of the system to move towards the thing that's beyond that.
Okay, thank you. Looking for raised hands. Looking for raised hands. I think this is Joao Victor Almeida. Your mic is open. Open the mic on your end. There you are. Speak up, please.
Hello. Sorry, my accent Brazilian. So I want to ask if all Marxist currents think of dialectical materialism in the same way. Speak of the Maoists, the Trotskyists, and the Leninists. Do all these currents think Marx philosophy to interpret reality in the same way? Thank you.
Okay. Looking for more raised hands. Jonathan, your mic is open. Jonathan Torres, please speak up.
Yes, hello.
We hear you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I was trying to raise a question concerning organizing for a local CSA, community-supported agriculture. I was wondering, as someone who is trying to advocate for dialectical materialism in my community, what is a good strategy moving forward as far as improving the material conditions for people who need food through the my CSA, while trying to promote dialectical methods into doing so? Thank you.
Thank you. Looking for more raised hands. We have a few more minutes to take. Okay. Khadijah, your mic is open. Open your mic on your end. Khadijah Haynes, there you are.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
I just wanted to ask a question about like Marxian economics. He goes in Capital, he talks about exploitation, like if you have an 8-hour workday and you work 4 hours, basically you complete all of your work in like 4 hours and you're working the next 4 hours for free. I just wanted to know if you guys could maybe delve into that a bit. And he also talks about tendential, like the rate of the rise and fall of the rate of profit. I wanted to know if you guys could maybe expound on that a bit, as well as like Cheetoism and your thoughts on that as well. Thank you.
Okay, let me invite you. Alvaro can respond as he chooses, but let me invite you to attend the class on Tuesday night at 7 7:30 p.m. Eastern, and the class on Thursday night at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. And those topics will be treated extensively. Well, some of what you asked anyway, the economic aspect of what you asked. So maybe a few more. Lawrence, Carol, your mic is open. Open the mic on your end, please. Lawrence Carroll.
Yeah, hello. I had a question regarding this kind of idea of looking for concrete changes in concrete evidence. That sounds it sounds very scientific to me in that sense, and it's very intuitive that you would look at the actual material changes going on. But how do we approach how do we use dialectical materialism to approach things like changes in I suppose thought or revolutionary thought? Like we talk about how we have to build like a way of thinking in our communities, right? And to me, I don't know, it just sounds kind of I'm a bit confused there between like looking at material change versus this kind of I wouldn't want to call it abstract, but it's definitely not material in the sense of like matter, that type of change.
Okay, thank you. Maybe one more, Alvaro?
Yes, okay.
Okay. Maggie, your mic is open. Maggie Tracy, there you are.
Hi, I had a quick question. I was wondering if we'd be able to access the slides after the completion of the webinar today. Thank you.
We will make the recordings available, which will as soon as possible, and so the recordings will include the slides. Should we take one more, Alvaro?
I think that's probably enough, so we can.
All right, then the floor is yours.
Yeah. Thank you, Dee. There's a lot of thoughtful questions. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Select.
7, 8. Yeah.
Select wisely.
Yes. Okay. Daniel asked the dialectical materialism, did it end when the counter-revolution in the Soviet Union in 1991? And the answer is no. Dialectical materialism refers to how change happens, and change is inevitable and eternal. It's always going to be there. There's always going to be contradictions in every society, in every situation. So no, it never ends. As you can see now, what's happened after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, now we have the Russian republics, and now Ukraine is an independent country, and then we also have NATO still in existence, and the struggle continues. So it never ends. So some of them I didn't quite get very well. I mean, there was one question about Marxist economy and exploitation, the nature of exploitation. Yes, I think that will be covered well next week. But just briefly responding to that is that this isn't a contradiction of capitalism. The main contradiction we said is social production versus private appropriation of the surplus value. So value is only created by workers. And when workers create value beyond their paychecks, then that is appropriated by capitalists. And so that creates a contradiction, right, between the working class and the capitalist class. And so that exploitation has to end. Sometimes that's confused with wage theft, which occurs certainly in the immigrant community, where they actually the paychecks are stolen from undocumented workers. That's a different type of thing. But there will be a further expounding on this in political economy class next Tuesday. So let me see if what else we could say. I think that João Victor Almeida is asking about different currents in left parties. I think many of them have very similar concepts of dialectical of change, dialectical change underway. The problem is with the practice, and some people only give lip service to dialectics and abstract it. This dialectics is always going to go on. Internal conflicts is always going to be present, and this will always cause change. So that is never going to really end. Let me see what else. I think there was the issue about quantitative versus qualitative changes in a union. Certainly, unionization is an important change that happens, and it creates a huge conflict. I didn't want to minimize it. While I emphasize the primary society's conflict between the working class and the capitalist class and socialist revolution, I didn't want to minimize intermediate struggles that are extremely important. The struggle for unionization is very important, in the consequent struggle for union consciousness is extremely important. Lenin talks about how workers automatically can acquire union consciousness, but the socialism is hard to get socialist consciousness. Well, I think those of us that have been involved in union drives recognize how difficult it is because the ruling class works overtime to create the impression that change and workers acting collectively to improve their working conditions and their wages is a contradiction of liberal economics, of what they call neoliberalist capitalism. So they will obstruct it in every possible way. So if you think that they're only concerned with socialism, no, they're very concerned with unionization, because they recognize that the working class is huge in this country. For instance, the working class is people that are getting a paycheck are more than about 160 million people. If you include their families, it's the overwhelming majority of the population. So you would say, how come they don't have a union? If the unions were that powerful, we would already have a revolution in this country. But that's why in Texas, for instance, the rate of unionization among private employers runs somewhere around 4 or 5%, 6%, depends on how you look at it and where you look at it. So imagine if the whole country was unionized, and the power the workers would have just in the collective bargaining process, and the level of race consciousness that would result from all that, this would be a totally different country. So this is extremely important. I never wanted to minimize how important it is to organize a union and how that would change a lot of people's lives. But you will find out that you can have a union and have a successful struggle to raise wages, but then the employer is always going to work overtime. The capitalist class works overtime to undermine the union, to decertify the union by giving a lot of fake news to the workers about how they're being manipulated because their dues are being used for progressive causes or otherwise. They will fight. Take, for instance, the unionization drive right now at Amazon. The next struggle is going to be not only that they take a vote to establish a union. The next struggle is going to be able to get a union contract, and the employers will fight twice as hard to avoid that from happening. So this continues and never stops. Is this applicable certainly to a food co-op, and how do you use it? Well, the main idea in this whole presentation of dialectical materialism is change is inevitable and is driven by contradictions in the system. Isn't it a contradiction that one of the largest food producers in the world, we have people going hungry? because they don't have the money to buy the products. Look at the food prices, how they're going up. So this is creating a lot of contradictions. Other countries like Mexico, for instance, are subsidizing food prices. They're working with employers to try and minimize at least the basic basket of products used for in common households. So they're working on it, but there is no such thing in this country because it goes it goes against the grain for the capitalist class in this country and neoliberal philosophy to interfere with the price mechanisms, and so they won't go for it. But I think that we should use dialectics in food cooperation in any activity to explain to people that change is inevitable and it will come about, and it's caused by these contradictions. And you can look for those contradictions in every case, but they're there. They occur in nature and they occur in society as well. Now, there was a question, I think Lawrence was asking this question, is how does, that we talked in this class about concrete, and Lyndon said that it's concrete, you know, that dialectics is, you got to look at it as very concretely. How does that have to do with revolutionizing thought? Well, it has everything to do with it. Yeah, and that is because our ideas are a reflection of reality, of the change going on in reality. So that molds our thinking. But also there's a human element, right? So it's not enough to know that as a worker, that collective bargaining will get you a better situation, a better bargaining position with respect to the employer. But it's also should be very important that in a society we said if we have revolutionary change, we're going to get a better society. That comes as a result of not of struggle, primarily of experience in struggle. I remember one comrade was telling the story about how he saw the struggle at a union and how powerful the workers got once they had a union and spoke with one voice and acted in one way. That transformed his whole life when he actually saw it in practice, not theoretical or not abstractly, but concretely, how that power was acquired and how it manifested itself. So it has to be handled very concretely. Not sure if I answered all the questions, but I think we'll leave it at that, and then we need to go ahead and just finalize some of what we learned today, and review some of the more main ideas. Let me see if I can go ahead and find the my slide where I wrote them down, because I tend to forget the order in which they show up. Okay, so some of the things that we discussed this morning was some of the review of the basic points from the morning session. Is change
Do
with
you want to move your slide, Alvaro?
No, I'm just going to end it right there. I'm just going to just go from
questions and comments.
Excuse me.
What's showing is a slide that says questions and comments.
Yes, no, I'm not going to show any more slides. I'm just going to go over this morning's basic sessions.
Okay.
I didn't want to go backwards and bring a lot of commotion, but I have it right here in front of me. Change with modification is inherent in nature and society, and we call it development. Change with modification is caused by internal contradictions in the system itself. We call this continuous process dialectical historical materialism. The dialectics of struggle is helpful towards our goal of a non-exploitive socialist society. And you can say the same thing is in the struggle for reforms. Dialectics of struggle is helpful in our mass movement, because without a mass movement for political change, for improvements in the working conditions of the working class, fundamental social change is not possible. Each of our members is engaged in this dialectics of struggle by uniting, energizing, and organizing our working class to win our ongoing struggle for socialism, winning working class political power. Again, I don't want to minimize all the other reforms that are necessary, including the labor organizing, union organizing. That's all part of this struggle. So our strategy and tactics must be informed through theory, proven in practice. So it's important that we use this dialectical method in each of our struggles to improve our work and bring out better results. That is it, Dee, and thanks everybody for listening. I know this is probably kind of a tough subject for the morning, but I hope that everybody got something out of it.
Thank you, Alvaro. Before everyone, we will take a brief break for lunch, and we will come back to the second class at 1 p.m. Eastern. So we hope you will stay with us. You can leave your system open, and we will return at 1 p.m. Eastern for the next class, which is the struggle for democracy in the USA. So I thank Alvaro for his the work he put into the presentation. I'd like to remind everyone that different people will treat the issues differently. And so we appreciate Alvaro's input this morning. And we look forward to the input that will be offered in the afternoon class, which starts at 1 p.m. Eastern. So we hope you'll stay with us for the afternoon class. And thank you very much, Alvaro.
You're most welcome.
Don't start yet? Now.
Okay, thank you all. Welcome to the afternoon session of the National Marxist School. My name is Anita Waters, and I was originally going to, planning on doing this presentation this afternoon on the evolution of the democratic struggle alongside Tony Pesanovsky. But unfortunately, Tony has COVID and is not feeling well today. So I have looked over his material that he was going to cover, and it's very comprehensive, and I'm sure it's ready for publication. So I anticipate that will be published in some venue to be announced in the future. So I'll stick with my original subject, which is really strategies of the ruling class and the democratic struggle. We have, just to introduce myself, I'm the chair of the Ohio district, and I studied sociology, Caribbean politics, and in political culture in graduate school. So I do draw on my experiences in Ohio, in Florida, where I sometimes spend time, and also in the Caribbean area. So this is a great week to talk about this struggle for democratic rights, because with this week and the Supreme Court decision that was leaked, we see on the horizon very clearly the erosion of rights that working people have worked so hard to win. And the Supreme Court seems to want to roll it back to 1787. And the will of the majority is cavalierly disregarded. So it's a really good time to address these questions. So let me take you on the first slide. Let's see. This will give you some idea of our path for today. We're going to talk about, well, what is the ruling class? Those two elements, the ruling class and the democratic struggle. We'll define what we mean by those two things. Then we will talk about the strategies that the ruling class uses in its fight against democratic struggle, the democratic movement, the movement for more rights by working people. And I have 7 strategies here. They're not all of equal importance, but we'll just go through those this afternoon. So let's see. First, let's start with the ruling class and what does the ruling class consist of? The ruling class is an entity unto itself, and it consists of those who control the means by which a society produces and distributes goods and services. And in turn, that ruling class controls the rest of the society, the rest of the population, sometimes through coercion, violence, exploitation, and cultural domination. In feudal societies, of course, the ruling class consisted of those who control productive land and who extract the value of people's labor in the form of rents and tributes. But of course, in industrial society, the ruling class consists of banks and other financial institutions, industrial corporations, large agribusinesses, and distribution networks like Amazon. The ruling class has used its wealth and military might to nestle, quote, paraphrasing here, nestle everywhere, settle everywhere, establish connections everywhere, to paraphrase Marx and Engels. They exploit the people they encounter around the world and basically steal their resources. So our program says, and I just want to read this little quote, the U.S. working class and people are oppressed by one of the most controlling, entrenched capitalist ruling classes ever, concentrating enormous political, economic, and military power in the hands of a few transnational organizations, corporations, led by global finance banks and the politicians who do their bidding. Now, of course, the ruling class is not always unified. It's sometimes quite segmented. You remember Dimitrov identified fascism as a phenomenon of a segment of the ruling class. And the ruling class, in turn, uses racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, anything it can to divide the ruling class and weaken it. Okay, so since the ruling class in the U.S. suffered some setbacks up in the 60s and 70s, but it really came roaring back in power during the Reagan administration. And you can see from this chart how the share of wealth held by the top 1% has gone up and up every year since the 1970s. The U.S. The ruling class in the 70s brought in think tanks and eventually they endowed conservative institutes at colleges. They brought in the religious fundamentalists who fomented this moral panic over abortion that we're dealing with right now. And that kind of moral panic deflects attention, or has deflected attention, from the profits that this ruling class was amassing all those years. The newly invigorated ruling class used government power to break unions, and at every chance they undermine the role that government has in making workers' lives better. And I want to emphasize here, the ruling class is an agent of social change as a class. We analyze in Marxist-Leninist analysis, we analyze society from a structural point of view, not looking at necessarily individual members of a class. The dynamics of social change as they're understood and explained by Marxist-Leninist analysis really aren't concerned with whether one person is working class or ruling class, but instead how their actions contribute to the working power of the working class, or the movement of the working class, or to the repression and exploitation of the ruling class. And of course, as individuals, so social class isn't a characteristic that each individual has. It can seem that way, but there are class traitors on both sides. Of course, was Friedrich Engels a member of the ruling class? He was a mill owner, but as Karl Marx's partner in theorizing, he was the ultimate class traitor. And what about Enrico Tarrio? You might not know his name, but he's an African American from Miami who grew up in a working class neighborhood. And can we say he's a member of the working class? He's the chairman of the Proud Boys, an organization that's doing the work of the ruling class. He heads up a white supremacist, male supremacist, fascist organization. Now, Enrico Tarrio doesn't own the means of production, so in a sense, he's a working class person, but he serves in the interests of those who do own the means of production. So wittingly or not, he does their bidding. So that's the ruling class. Let's turn our attention to the other element in that title, and that is the democratic struggle. And of course, democracy, as we all learned, is from the Greek words for government or authority of the people. It's a form of government, a theoretical form of government in which the voice of the people shapes the affairs of government, in which all citizens have equal rights before the law, and the will of the majority prevails. Democracy has been seen as a social, philosophical, political, and economic system, but we recognize in Marxist-Leninist analysis that economic relations change first, and they are the driver of other forms of change, including political forms. So Lenin argued any democracy as a form of political organization ultimately serves production and is ultimately determined by the production relations in a given society. Our role as communists is to unite the working class, to increase its autonomy and independence. Whoops, I went a little too fast. A revolutionary majority is our goal, one based on mass organizations and political parties, one that will make it, quote, make it politically impossible for the ruling class to use political or military means to return to power, unquote. That's from the program. We are working towards the establishment of a socialist democracy, something described as one in which citizens' rights are not just proclaimed, but are consolidated by law and secured by the fact that exploitation by private employers is ended and that the crises of capitalism have passed. And that's from the website EquiRed, which is always a good source. As you know, and will read in Tony's work, our country's revolutionary history is characterized by massive struggles to protect and expand democracy, from adding the Bill of Rights to the Constitution to the referendum in the past few years to establish voting rights for ex-felons in Florida. So it stands to reason that if the working class is the vast majority of people, how could it be defeated? In a country that purports to be not just a democracy, but the greatest democracy on earth, how is the working class voice silenced, and how is its power undercut? And we find that the ruling class has its methods, and that's what we're going to talk about for the rest of this talk. In this paper, I'm focusing on some of the specific ways that the ruling class has shaped the U.S. as a state, as a nation, and as an imperialist power, both historically and in the current day. Specifically, how has it worked against the struggle for greater power of the working class? How has it managed to put into place what D. Miles calls the, quote, maneuverings and manipulations that divide us, unquote? The ruling class is in a constant struggle to contract the electorate, to shrink it, to curtail civil liberties, and to give the rich every opportunity to dominate elections and dictate policy. Democratic rights in capitalist society are under constant attack. So if democracy is said to mean people actually having power in government, how can we measure that? For bourgeois political scientists, usually if a society holds elections, however badly they are run, they are counted as a democracy. So when I was in graduate school, I studied Jamaican elections in Jamaica in the post-colonial era. And it was a time that the U.S. praised Jamaica for its, quote, steadfast commitment to democratic traditions, unquote. But it was clear on the ground that the contests that they called elections never gave a chance for the will of the people to be expressed. Instead, institutions set up by the ruling class and approved by the colonial powers chose the candidates, arranged for their victories, and for the most part carried on, as usual, their dictating policies. Still, when the masses were mobilized and activated and politicians felt compelled to listen to them, significant advancements were made in the conditions of the working classes in those years I studied, which was before it was shut down by the ruling class in turn. So I'm going to turn now to these seven ways that the ruling class represses democracy. And I forgot to mention at the very beginning is Dee gave us all different ways of organizing our presentations. And the way I'd like to organize it is I thought I might be presenting alongside Tony, so I wanted to race through it. So I'm going to go for about 37 minutes total, I think, of 38, 39, no more than 40 minutes. And then we'll be able to take your questions and comments, and then I'll comment. I'll return and try to summarize at the end. So I hope we have some really good discussion. And I have some obscure examples of these ruling class methods, and you may have better examples, and it would be great to hear those. Okay, so if democracy means majority rule, what does the ruling class do when elections are actually used to challenge the economic and social status quo? Thinking about this made me think back to Eddie Carthen. Some of you might remember Eddie Carthen. He was elected mayor of Chula, Mississippi in 1976. He was the first Black person elected mayor in Chula, Mississippi, a small town, since Reconstruction. And it was a great victory for him. But after his election, the white remnants of the local plutocracy just stepped in immediately and said, no way, this is just not going to happen. They locked him out of City Hall. They hounded him. They brought him up on trumped up charges, and they sent him to prison. And you'll see here on the slide, John Wojek recently reprinted this article because he said it was one of his very first articles for the People's World. It was, I think, published in 1982. Eddie Carthen was a big case that the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression worked on in the 80s. So I looked up, by the way, I looked him up. What is he doing now, Eddie Carthen? And turns out years later, in 2015, he was elected again. He was elected this time Holmes County Supervisor. And after 4 years of public service, the state auditor of Mississippi said that his election was fraudulent because he filed a paper wrong. And they were demanding that he repay all of the salary and benefits he had gotten in the years that he was serving in that role as a public servant. So I have some questions out. This was a couple of years ago. I have the feeling it's just been delayed because I have not heard anything, and my inquiries to some folks down there didn't get responded to. But it just goes to show he's still being hounded. And of course, we learned in January 21 that the outright overturning of the will of the majority of voters is a threat, even at the level of the highest elected official. So that's our first category, overturning elections. Let's turn to the limits on the franchise that have been established. For those who want to attack democratic rights, of course, the limiting the franchise, making fewer people eligible to vote, or making sure fewer people vote, period, is an obvious strategy, something that the ruling class has used to disfranchise working class people since the colonial origins of this country. And in Boston, even before the United States was established, in the early 1700s, wealth was consolidated in the top 1%. Top 1% of the population owned 44% of the wealth. So that makes it even worse than what we saw earlier in that chart about 2018. Voting rights, of course, were limited to white men who owned property. In the South, fear of a black-white alliance led the Virginia Assembly to pass the so-called slave codes, which involved discipline and punishment applicable only to the enslaved. And also, they passed laws that gave indentured servants, who were white for the most part, specific advantages when their terms of indenture were over, including free land grants. When the Constitution was drawn up in 1776, it consolidated and institutionalized a set of power dynamics that included, in Howard Zinn's words, quote, the inferior position of blacks, the exclusion of Indians, and the establishment of supremacy for the rich and powerful in a new nation, unquote. Most of the men who wrote the Constitution represented men of wealth in land, slaves, manufacturing, or shipping, according to Zinn, and some represented extreme wealth, like George Washington was the wealthiest man in the hemisphere. They constructed a federal government structure that protected their specific interests. Namely, they gave protective tariffs to the manufacturers. They gave protection from land speculators against Indians, security against slave revolts for the plantation owners, and of course, women, the enslaved, people without property, all of these people were excluded from all aspects of the process. There was a brief period after the Civil War when blacks in the South voted, when racially mixed public education was introduced. The 13th Amendment outlawed slavery, and the 14th declared all persons born or naturalized in the U.S. Were citizens. Something Donald Trump wanted to overturn. The 15th Amendment declared, quote, the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the U.S. or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. The first Civil Rights Act that outlawed the exclusion of blacks from public accommodation was passed in 1866. But of course, soon after Lincoln's death, Andrew Johnson became president, and he started rolling back the gains. And then I jump in my text here to 1940, forgetting to mention that women struggled to get the vote, sometimes with really poorly constructed arguments. and that occurred in 1919. But by 1940, just concentrating here on the exclusion of Black Americans, only 3% of eligible African Americans in the South were registered to vote. Jim Crow laws like literacy tests, poll taxes, violence, and intimidation kept African Americans from voting. Those limits on voting, on the franchise among workers, really had lasting effects. It's pretty well known or accepted idea among political scientists, and here I'm quoting Francis Fox Piven and Richard Clower. They say the partial disfranchisement of working people in that early part of the 20th century, it was a time when socialist parties and labor parties were being developed in Europe. And because of our disfranchisement of working people, that for Francis Fox Piven and Richard Clower helps explain why no comparable labor-based political parties were established in the United States. So,
Anita,
yes.
You may be putting your papers over the mic. Please be careful.
Okay, I'll try to be like this. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, I was going to say, Andrew, I was going to refer again to Tony's talk that you're not going to be able to hear right now, but he will talk in his article that is coming out about how victories like the 1965 Voting Rights Act were reached. Now, legislative efforts to limit the franchise are alive and well today. Despite Florida's, here's another picture of, DeSantis. This is Ron DeSantis, of course, the the governor of Florida. And on the right, Kelvin Bolton. Despite Florida voters' overwhelming support of a referendum that allowed ex-felons the right to vote, the DeSantis government, right after that vote, passed a rule that said they couldn't vote until all their fees were paid and fines. And people leave Florida prisons owing thousands of dollars that they're never going to repay to the state. And in this one case, Kelvin Bolton, he's an ex-felon with a history of mental illness and cognitive challenges. And he was persuaded to register to vote as he left prison. And he was happy to vote. He was glad to be able to he registered Republican, and he cast his vote. But then later he was charged with voter fraud and fined thousands of dollars more. And DeSantis here is having basically a war on voting on taking every step he can. And this man Bolton is one of many people who have been singled out for prosecution. So the next type of response I've looked at a little bit is, and there's so many examples of this, and that's violence and intimidation. The ruling class doesn't usually do its own dirty work, but ruling class henchmen are brought in to do their bidding. In the civil rights era, the Southern white oligarchy used its economic power to organize the KKK and other terrorist groups. The NAACP reports that between 1882 and 1968, there were 4,743 lynchings in the United States. That is extrajudicial killings. The horrors of Bloody Sunday, when police beat up voting rights marchers on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in 1965, was a signal incident in the fight for voting rights. But mobs and police were not the only forces employed to break working class power. In the late 19th century, corporations formed private armies to use force to break unions. And most notoriously was the Pinkerton Detective Agency, which at one point in, I think, the 1880s or so, had more men working for it than the United States Army. Corporations like the mines wielded power without interference from the state. And we'll touch on, we'll touch on that later when it comes to judicial actions. Okay, representations and propaganda is my next category, and this is from sort of sociology's version of critical race theory. We have a theory that's called racial formation theory, which has a lot of parallels. And racial formation theory distinguishes analytically between structures and representations. Structures are laws, practices, and institutions that may either reinforce racial hierarchy in a society or undermine it. So they may reinforce class hierarchy as well. But they have specific material consequences. For instance, they may extend or shorten people's lives. They may provide higher or lower wages. They may provide pension or not a pension. In contrast, representations are ideas, myths, and meanings that attach to categories. And representations also may either reinforce racial and class hierarchies, or they may undermine those hierarchies. And they may actually give permission to people to support policies that create the structures that actually do have material consequences. So let's talk about representations and propaganda in this case first. During Reconstruction, when African Americans were being elected to legislatures and they were taking part in the political lives of their towns and states, Howard Zinn writes, a great propaganda campaign was undertaken north and south that claimed, quote, that Blacks were inept, lazy, corrupt, and ruinous to the governments of the South when they were in office. The ruling class also floated myths of a European class, and they brought, at every opportunity, they brought poor white farmers into a new alliance against Blacks. This is one area that's this is off well, maybe it's still definitely in the category of representations, but I like to think about the question that I have had discussions in my with comrades about: are members of the ruling class evil? I think evil is a metaphysical term, and so I don't want to use it. I agree that there are lots of corporate power holders who are just completely heartless people, like Big Pharma raising the price of insulin, the oil companies that withhold data about the effects of fossil fuels. These are people we might be tempted to call evil. And they seem to go about it with no conscience whatsoever. But there are other parts of the ruling class that are people who are convinced of their own goodness. And they tell themselves, the reason they're convinced of that goodness is that they tell themselves myths about why they're entitled to their wealth. They worked hard, they had the best ideas, they paid their dues in their internships, or they paid their dues in their residencies and college educations. The concept that wealth is a sign of blessing, furthermore, is an indication, that is something that has deep roots in American and European culture. This is the idea that from the Protestant ethic that if you are doing well and you're gaining in wealth, that's an indication that you're among the saved. The Puritans of New England had an outsized influence on the structures that were shaped by representation about class that these people put forth. And I think you could see the prosperity gospel, the so-called prosperity gospel movement, is akin to this kind of wealth as a blessing because God is smiling on you. We saw, all right, as far as media and culture, we saw in 2016 especially how media are used to spread falsehoods that are aimed at contracting the electorate. And you may have some good examples of that. All the examples I could think of were very localized. There were, Facebook posts about about Democrats and being the same as Republicans that I think were something that took the wind out of the motivation to vote. On representations and voting rights in particular, political scientists telling people their vote doesn't matter is one of the most irritating things. It's one that has the effect of contracting democracy and silencing the voice of the people. Between 35 and 60% of eligible voters don't vote in any one election. And there are 25% of the eligible voters who never vote at all. And many are convinced that their vote doesn't count. And others are daunted by barriers to voting, which gets us to structures, which is the next category that I want to talk about. And remember, social structures are those constitutions, laws, bureaucratic practices. They masquerade as egalitarian, but they end up having outcomes that disproportionately affect working class negatively and negatively affect its ability to use its franchise. A study of non-voters showed that factors that led them to not vote included not being able to get off of work in time or to physically access their polling place, or failing to jump through the hoops of early registration, or for purged voters, like those in Ohio, re-registration and making sure you're registered before the time runs out. Bureaucratic structures that administer elections may make decisions that make voting more difficult in areas where working people live. And this happened in Ohio in a really dramatic way in the 2004 election when John Kerry was running against George Bush. George Bush won his second term. Well, yes, I guess he won that maybe a little more validly than the first term. But in Ohio in 2004, we had this Secretary of State, Kenneth Blackman, and he had all kinds of rules and regulations. You could not, if you had a voter registration form and it was on the wrong stock of paper, then it would be rejected outright. There was a horrible election in 2004. Twice as many people voted as voted in 2000. But they didn't accommodate them at all. They didn't increase the number of voting machines. So as a result, people waited online for hours to vote. And it was raining that day in much of Ohio. I happen to remember this one, especially because my oldest son's first election that he ever voted in. And I think it took him 8 hours to get through in the little town of Oberlin, Ohio, which is a little maybe blue oasis in a red area, and that might be why the lines were so long there. And then there's, by the way, that incident, that election in 2004. After that, the Ohio voters really did insist on improvements, and as a result, we do have a much more generous early voting system here in Ohio. Not early, we don't have registration on demand or same day registration, but we do have weeks of early voting. Okay, then there's gerrymandering, which is, well, you've heard about this. It's a big problem. That's my example again is from Ohio. In Ohio, a huge majority passed a referendum a couple of years ago to establish a redistricting commission, and this was in response to how gerrymandered the state was. So, by the way, but unfortunately, this year is our first year with this redistricting commission after the 2020 census. And unfortunately, the way the law was written, there are a lot of loopholes, and the GOP-dominated commission have used every one of them. They've passed now 3 maps, and each one is declared unconstitutional by the Ohio Supreme Court. And now the commission is just waiting it out. They know we have to have a map in order to have a primary before we have the election. So it will probably, we've already had one primary. This would be the second primary, so that will reduce turnout as well. So those are some of the ways that's happening in Ohio. And of course, DeSantis, in my second favorite state, he just drew his own map, eliminating 2 African American districts because he's got so much power in Florida that the legislature just does what he says. So then we turn to judicial cases, and let's see, am I missing something? Oh yeah, I just want to go back to structures again and say, we're concentrating on these little bureaucratic structures, but we're not just talking about with structural factors. We're not just talking about rules governing elections, but we're talking about the trend since 1970s of a full embrace of neoliberalism. And with it, the decline in union density, the decline in corporate tax obligations, and the deregulation of industry. And these have resulted in a working class that often is working more than one job to make ends meet. That might mean 4 or 5 jobs held in one family, and for wages that can buy one less in the marketplace today than they used to. People are impoverished by the process of getting a higher education, and young people are delaying beginning families because of their student loan debt and the high cost of healthcare and the high cost of daycare, having children very expensive. And I see this as another side to the coin of reproductive rights. We have to have the right to be able to have families and not run ourselves into bankruptcy. I also think that innovation and creativity are stifled by having this younger generation beholden to work for corporate America in order to pay off their student loans and to maintain their health insurance. So I'm hoping this group in the discussion will have some other good examples of ways that structures limit the size of the electorate and the voice of people in the way our government is organized. The judicial, the indifference to the idea of majority rule, we saw that, as we said earlier. This was reaffirmed this week with the leaked draft of the Supreme Court decision overturning Roe v. Wade. The majority of people in this country do not want to see Roe overturned, but their will has been thwarted by courts dominated by jurists who were selected by a president who did not win a majority of the electorate, and these justices were ratified by senators who also represent a minority of the electorate. Experts in law say that even if a law is passed by Congress and signed into law by the president, establishing women's bodily or people's bodily autonomy, the Supreme Court could overturn it using the same logic that they are using to justify this decision that was leaked. It's really the first time, this will be the first time the Supreme Court, I say one of the first times the Supreme Court history, that precedent has been overturned in such a way that takes rights away from people. And I thought it was the only one. People have been saying it's the only one that does that, but then someone pointed out Janus was also taking away the voting rights of public workers. So when I was thinking earlier before this week about judicial restrictions on the voice of the working people, what I thought of was, of course, the Citizens United versus FEC. This is the famous corporations are people case. In January 2010, the Supreme Court ruled in a case brought by Citizens United. Now, that's a right-wing media company that produces some so-called documentaries, and they produced a very negative and dubious documentary that they called it a documentary about Hillary Clinton, and the Federal Election Commission forbade it from being aired too close to the primary election day. The court ruled that corporations can spend unlimited resources on election campaigns. With that decision, the Supreme Court overturned election restrictions that dated back more than a century. It allowed for the establishment of super PACs, political action committees that serve the wealthiest donors and that expand secret money through nonprofits that don't disclose their donors. We see in Ohio again, our Senate Republican Senate nominee is someone who was a one donor candidate for a long time, but that donor had given $15 million through his super PAC. As a result of Citizens United, the GOP in particular has benefited. A study in 2020 of election results found strong evidence that these regulatory changes increase the electoral success of Republican candidates, thereby leading to a more ideologically conservative legislatures. So it's just like a juggernaut, feeding on itself and making things even worse. The FEC, the Citizens United versus FEC ruling, I wanted to quote Associate Justice John Paul Stevens, who declared that in his dissent, that the court's ruling represented, quote, a rejection of the common sense of the American people who have recognized the need to prevent corporations from undermining self-government. So I wanted to also go back to that union busting through the courts. Judges, when the Pinkerton Detective Agency was doing its worst, judges of that time, when a case did come to before a judge, judges saw unionization efforts as violations of the property rights of corporate owners. Therefore, corporate violence against workers was ruled as defensive. So that's the result of that. So my last item here, and I don't have too much on it, is imperialism as a ruling class strategy to limit democracy. I want to quote our program again, which says, despite the trappings of democracy, the U.S. government, like those of other imperialist countries, implements foreign policy as a direct instrument of monopoly capital, enabling the accumulation of capital for the monopolies. And one of the ways it does that is by undermining democratic outcomes in other countries that are, that the U.S. may choose to support certain candidates through propaganda and misinformation, violence and assassination. There's abundant evidence, and these are my two pictures here. Michael Manley on the left with Fidel Castro. He was in power in Jamaica, prime minister from 72 to 80. And then in 1980, Edward Seaga on the right there was elected. But that election campaign was the most violent that had been experienced in Jamaica. There was just a lot of guns on the street. Guns are not manufactured in Jamaica. They come in from the United States. And then they also brought in thousands of religious workers who went into the countryside, and their constant message was to vote for socialism. Or Jesus Christ wouldn't vote for socialism. That was the bottom line. So that was a successful way of getting a more U.S. friendly prime minister into office in Jamaica. That happens all the time. Of course, Haiti, Honduras, Chile, there's innumerable examples of the United States just going in and saying no, just like the white plantocracy took away Eddie Carthen's victory as mayor of Chula, Mississippi. And that's one of the most irritating things about Cuba for the United States, is that we can't float our own candidates in their elections. So I have my sources here are varied and not in any particular order. But that's what I have for you today. And I am really interested to hear what you have to say. And we can all be on. I'm sorry that Tony's complimentary presentation isn't included today. But I think you will find that in print in the next few weeks, hopefully. So Dee, that's all I have right now. You want to open the floor?
Okay, we'll open the floor for discussion now. Please please use your mouse clicker, your mouse cursor to click the picture of the hand and open click the picture of the mic to open the mic on your end. And then because we see the hand, we will open your mic on this end and call your name. And please say what you want to say, but briefly. So I'm looking for pictures of raised hands. We have a little more time than we had originally planned, so we will be able to hear more people. Lowell Denny, click the mic. There you are.
Thank you, Anita. Aloha, Anita. Great presentation. Aloha.
How are you, Lowell?
So I'm well, thank you. First, before I ask my question, my mind is blown, and I thank you for sharing that information about Chula, Mississippi. I shouldn't be surprised, but it still made me stand up in my chair. Just it sounds like you're doing some research about that story and you're following it. So I hope to see something in people's world about it, because I'm shocked. I shouldn't be shocked, but I am shocked. Anyway, my question, or my statement is in regards to the structures. Would you agree that adding the Commission on Presidential Debates might be one of those structures? As I recall, that was created by the two parties because the League of Women Voters, which had been conducting the debates, had allowed John Anderson into the debates. And the threat was a third party would meet the league's standard to be on the stage. And so the two parties conspired to create this corporation to conduct debates thereafter. Would you agree with that's one of the structures?
Dee, can I just respond to that? Maybe I should.
If you wish.
Okay. Yes, I just want to say thank you, Lowell. Yes, you're right. Actually, I don't know didn't rebrief myself on the specific history of that, but that sounds completely plausible. And I do remember the Anderson's involvement, and that is that's a perfect example of a structure that really inhibits the voice of the working class. And I do agree. I mean, I will follow up on Chula, Mississippi. I'll ask John Wojcik what maybe he knows something more too, since he recently resurrected that article. Thanks, Lowell.
Rachel Burnett, your mic is open.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
A little bit louder, please.
Okay. So I am from Mississippi. I live here currently, and I am not at all shocked about Chula. Was not familiar with it, so I'm going to do some research on that myself. But I was one of those people that did not feel like my vote counted. I still don't feel like my vote counts here. I vote in every election that I can now. But that's a very recent thing. It started with Trump, and now I vote out of self-defense. So living in a state that is so red, how do you make a difference? I've tried to organize things. I have, like the last time I was trying to start a group here, two people, and like there's never, I can't find people. So yeah, just any encouragement of how to get our message out in a place that is so unfriendly to it. And that's all.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. And Dee, I thought I did say that I would collect questions and respond to them later, but I think I might want to just respond to them one at a time, if that's okay.
If it's your pleasure, please do.
Okay, thank you. So, Rachel, that was really interesting. I'm glad you're carrying on the struggle in Mississippi, and I'm sure it is discouraging. And I think part of the problem with gerrymandering is that our votes don't seem to count. Like, I am now in a district, a congressional district that is it. They took all the Democratic voters and packed them into one district. So this woman, my congresswoman, who's pretty good, Joyce Beatty, she's a member of the Congressional Black Caucus. She is going to win, and there's no doubt about it. So it seems like there's no point in it seems like your vote doesn't count. I think they're counting on that to decrease interest in the election. So I'm glad you're persisting and voting anyway. And I think one of the ways you can approach that in a red state or a situation like that is by looking at the issues in particular, instead of going, left or right or Democratic or Republican. Maybe looking at situations in the what is hurting your neighbors, what is hurting working class people in your community, and how could what demands should they be making to make that a better, make their conditions of life better and their services from the government better. And I think, trying to organize your neighbors along those lines without introducing Democratic or Republican or communist or socialist idea, labels on anything. I think that is one way. I'm involved in a community in Florida that's overwhelmingly Republican. It just seems like it's a county that is like, I think 70% voted for Donald Trump. But even that means there's 16,000 people who didn't vote for Donald Trump, who voted for Joe Biden in last election. So there's thousands of people out there who are, and they often have to sort of keep their identity quiet, as terms of yard signs and things like that. But I think finding some of those people and getting to work with them on things that are of real importance to their lives is a first step. Thanks for your question or your comment too.
Thank you. Shay, your mic is open.
Shay.
Excuse me. Yeah. I'm sorry, got a cough real quick. One of the most particularly difficult parts of the democratic struggle right now is the very violent outbreak of transphobia that's restricting the rights of transgender people to just purely exist. The party resolved to throw itself fully into the struggle, but it hasn't really cemented itself in the club. So what can we do, or what are you doing to get party members involved in the struggle for trans rights?
Mm-hmm. Great. Good to hear from you, Shay. I think I agree that violence against trans people and transphobia in general is really the behind the many bills that Republican state legislatures have come up with. In Ohio, we have them too. And we do have at least in Columbus, Ohio, there are some very good trans rights organizations. And we make a point in our club, the Anahas Morgan Club in Columbus, to show that we're supportive of other groups' struggles. So when there were trans rights marches, we were there, and we were there with maybe our Communist Party shirts on or something, some indication, or where people know who we are these days. There's a very active group in Columbus. So I think we do have to keep those struggles on the front burner. And Columbus is a very LGBTQ rich town. We have two sort of competing pride parades, and there's other activities. So we try to be at those activities and be there just to show our support for those struggles. I think that's what we need to do, and also come out against those bills that are coming out from the legislature. But thanks for your question. It's a really important struggle, and I'm glad to see the party has reiterated its commitment on that front.
Okay, I think it's SIGG. Yes, your mic is open. Speak up.
Yes, Siggy.
Speak up, please.
Okay, so thanks for the 7 methods for disrupting democracy. We see that not only in the political arena, but in pretty much every arena. You can see that a lot in labor organizing as well, especially the propaganda, the intimidation, overturning elections, limiting who can vote. I wanted to make a particular case about imperialism and see a really good example of that is, I think there was an African president or prime minister, I don't remember what country it was, but he was a bit too friendly with socialist countries for the US's liking. I think he was assassinated and the Soviet Union named a school after him. Do you happen to know who I'm talking about?
Patrice Lumumba.
Thank you.
Thank
Dave.
you.
Sorry.
Thank you.
No, thank you. I'm glad you rescued me there. Yeah, but go ahead. Is that your, you want to elaborate a little on that?
So how do you think we can get past the propaganda that the ruling classes like to put on, well, like the labor movement currently going on? Like, what's an effective method that we can use to fight that propaganda?
Okay, yeah, good question. We're very supportive in Columbus of the Starbucks unionization efforts that are going on right now in 2 shops in Columbus, and we have a I don't know whether I'm saying something out of turn here, but we have a group chat that involves a lot of community members as well as the organizers. And for instance, they posted, they had a Starbucks management posted a flyer all about how awful unions are. And so they took a picture of that and put it on the group chat, and we all get to make fun of it. And I think that really helps, sort of take the wind out of the sails of the end. There's workers. These workers are too savvy for that. They've watched the YouTube videos of the anti-union votes, anti-union propaganda that Target and Walmart put out. They're not born yesterday. They really understand what's going on, and I think those kind of education, labor education, is really important to counteract those kind of messages from management. So I think education, I think you have to try to get out ahead of it and make sure your messages are paramount in what people are receiving. But I like your idea about how all of these methods are used against unions, and it's like all of these methods are used against in many ways to disempower workers at every opportunity. So thanks for your question.
Okay. Sandra Laycock, your mic is open. There you are.
I want to go back to what you said about characterizing the ruling class members thereof as evil. I mean, I agree, it's metaphysical, but the emphasis on the moral dimension is really important, i.e., it's immoral to be spending money on weapons instead of housing, medical care for all, and so on. And this is especially important if we want to engage with faith groups. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Of course, you're right. There is a moral component here, and if you if people who do immoral things are defined as evil, then I guess they would be defined as evil. I just I just I do want to avoid metaphysical constructs when I can, but I know in characterizing the ruling class, we do have to emphasize sometimes their greed and their heartlessness and their contempt for working people, and all of those are dimensions of immorality, and also those big immoral aspects of spending money on weapons and so forth. You're absolutely right. Thank you.
I think the point you wanted to make too is the point that Marx made, which is that you can change the individuals all you want, and you'll have the same product because it's the system, the greed, the immorality, the neglect of human needs. It's a product of capitalism. So you can change the individuals and put different individuals there, but as a function of how capitalism must operate, you'll have similar results. So I knew you wanted
Good
to.
point. Yes.
Okay. So so Tonya, we're opening your mic now. Sorry for the Tonya, your mic is open.
Thank you so much. My name is Tanya, and while I live in the Northeast now, I am from Mississippi. And so I know Chula very well. I actually know people who go to reunions there often and the like sort. And so there's two things, and then I have a suggestion, and then I have a question. So the one thing that I would like to know. I'm sorry.
Briefly, please.
Can you? Yes, it will be brief.
Thank you.
Do you want me to continue?
Yes, thank you very much.
And so one of the pieces about Chula, and I think that it would be great to use Chula as maybe a case study for the National Party to sort of to look at, because it would address this issue which you're talking about with politics, but it's economics. The number one transactional place in Chula is a liquor store. Most of the people have been disfranchised. Most of the people who are under 35 have no employment. And the nearest place that they can go is Jackson, Mississippi, which is the capital, which is over, far. It's a distance. So I think like maybe looking at Chula as almost like a case study, and looking at how Marxist-Leninism can be used, looking at Chula as a case study, because it addresses a lot of issues. One of the pieces, so that's the suggestion, right? Looking at the case study of Chula. And so the next piece will be the question that I have is this. One of the pieces that you talked about was that one of the obstructions that's used is that why people don't vote. Like there's a whole subculture in Black community now that really says that they're not voting as a form of protest. And so how can we, and I know people who don't vote because they are saying they're not letting the white man, meaning the Democratic or the Republican Party, violate their rights and use them and so on and so forth. And that's a real subculture. So like, how do we address that? Because in essence, they see their non-voting as a form of resistance and protest, which is actually a part of revolution.
Well, good questions, Tanya. I really appreciate that. And I'm just amazed that there's two people who know something about Chula, Mississippi, in the group today. And I have put out calls to Frank Chapman and also to a journalist who studies, who works for the paper there, and I hope I get more information. And it would make an interesting case study of just overturning elections that don't work out as people want them to. Now, this problem in maybe in the Black community, but also in the white community too, of showing your opposition by not voting is something that I'm familiar with. I think anybody who's tried to do voter registration on the street and have asked people to vote, to register to vote, sometimes you come across people who are not registered and just are determined not to vote for one reason or another. And I don't have an easy answer to that. I think, and I would invite anybody else who's on the call who has an answer to come on and talk about that. But I think, you know, when you look at these very close elections, and I mean, I know it's not very popular to talk about the 2016 election, but we're just it was so clear that Donald Trump was intending to appoint judges who would overturn Roe v. Wade. And then with the way Mitch McConnell treated the Merrick Garland nomination, it was just, I think it was the results of that election were to enable the court to do what they're apparently going to do. So I think maybe showing people also think about one of the things I came across, which I wasn't really studying here because that was Tony's bailiwick here, but how many people struggled and died in the effort to establish voting rights. I mean, what about their legacy? And people were killed in that conflict. You know, when you think about the lynchings that have taken place. But also just the struggles in the immediate Voting Rights Act, after the lead up to the Voting Rights Act rather of 1965. You can see that there's those lives that have been lost or even or just affected. So I think maybe telling history a little bit more, and I think we one of the things I'm very interested in is Black history as a revolutionary act. Talking about Black history as a revolutionary act. It's happened over and over again that people are punished for telling Black history. Now we see it with this critical, effort to get critical race theory and Black history out of schools. But it has happened. My club is named after Anna Haas Morgan. Well, Anna Haas Morgan's husband was fired from the Ohio State University in the 1940s because he organized a exhibition on Black history at the Ohio Historical Center. That was his last act, and it was it was for teaching Black history. And then there's also Walter Rodney, who got run out of Jamaica in 1968 for teaching Black history. So African history to the Jamaican people. So I think teaching that history and making sure we honor the struggles and that have come before us, I think is one way we could address that, and maybe others have some ideas as well. But thanks for your question or comments too.
Maybe she wanted to. Tonya, did you want to add anything? And if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly, I apologize. But let me go back to her. Tonya, did you want to add anything?
No, I'm just, thank you so much, Anita, for addressing that. The only thing that I would say is that, again, this is why I think the party right now, we're at a critical time, because the people that I'm talking about, they literally see themselves in the legacy of Fannie Lou Hamer. I'm going from Mississippians' perspective, right? They see themselves in the legacy of Medgar Evers. They see themselves as their non-vote, meaning that no one can manipulate them. They see it as like a form of organizing. And so basically the idea of the waving the flag, and they will even tell you the waving the flag of guilt it's no longer something that's on them. That's a tactic that was used in the 70s and 80s, but for this millennial generation is different. So I think that as a party, I think it's something that we can do by that's why I was saying, like, maybe looking at some case studies like Chula, and saying, look, this is what systems look like. And this is why this is what systems look like economically, politically, and the like sort. But thank you so much for allowing me to come back on, Dee. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we have a Tristan. Hold on. Tristan, your mic is open.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, so as we sort of like struggle to build this new labor movement in like the 21st century, how will we as Marxists sort of keep the workers focused on like instituting or implementing qualitative change instead of just quantitative change? Because couldn't it be argued that the sort of like waves of deregulation and neoliberalization that started in like the 70s and 80s and whatnot was a result of the lack of qualitative change in the structure, if that makes sense? Like sort of we organized unions and then we sort of stopped there and there was never any broader movement to challenge capitalism, and couldn't it be held that that sort of led to its stagnation? So then how will we as Marxists keep the working class focused on challenging capitalism and like implementing that qualitative structural change?
Okay, wow, that's a big question, Tristan. I'm not sure I could even think of, get an approach to that. But you're right that sometimes unions, they get into a sort of a satisfied, they're satisficing, to use a word that I don't know, some administrative person used to use, satisficing, which is satisfying and sufficing combined, and they tend to just go after bread and butter issues instead of looking at the real roots of capitalism and the roots of the problems of the working class in capitalism. I think one thing is the thing that we're grappling with right now is these crises of capitalism that go from it's inflation today, could tip over into recession tomorrow, and that kind of swing is something that is unique to capitalism and is something that is really hurting workers. So yeah, as far as qualitative change, yes, I think that qualitative change will emerge. I think I remember in my readings about historical materialism, there's the idea that that quantitative changes will be will accumulate and then it will like turn over into a qualitative change. So I think as we empower workers, as we empower them to seize control of their own working lives by organizing and bargaining collectively with their employer, and get a sense of efficacy in terms of community organizations and other intermediate organizations that can actually get something done. I think that empowerment will eventually and automatically almost kick over into a qualitative change and an intolerance of continuing to grapple with capitalism. And that quote that I had earlier from the party about making it so that the ruling class can't come back in terms of the political and military arrangements. So yeah, it's a very thorny question, but thank you for your comment, Tristan.
Sarah, I'm sorry. Just a minute. I thought. Okay, sorry. Just a minute. Yamid, your mic is open.
Oh, hello. Thank you for all of what you had to say. I had a question. You mentioned that you had some experience in the Caribbean. I'm Puerto Rican, and I was wondering, listening to some of your talk, like the 7 methods and the like. I was asking if not just about if those 7 methods of how the ruling class, suppress is evident, if not only do they express themselves in the same way as they do in a colony like Puerto Rico, but if the way we combat those methods, right? Like, if do we express them the same way, or is it a different situation? Should we like find a different means of doing it, or is it this, same thing?
Wow. Well, that's a good question. I think combating these methods is something that I think Tony's talk will really have, or article will really shed some light on. But I think yes, if you look at the global working class, the way the colonies are, colonialization is organized also is a way of disempowering working people. So I think maybe the mix of those methods is different in situations of colonialism or situations like obtained in Puerto Rico today. But I think yes, those are methods, and I think I also want to say, yeah, I came up with 7 things, but I think there could be others that I don't think that was an exhaustive list. I think the ruling class has all kinds of tricks up its sleeve and will, use every means possible. So thank you. Yeah, you're right. It would be interesting to really think more deeply about the parallels between the way imperialism is used as a way of disempowering the working class and other forms of disfranchisement. Thanks.
Michael, your mic is open. Michael.
Hello?
Tronkale. There you are.
Yes, that's me. Hello, I had a real quick question. Do you view the overthrow of Roe versus Wade as a way of like splitting gender solidarity maybe? Or could it be a way for men to just control female sexuality and reduce their political power? I don't know, maybe even viewing the female body as like a means of production in and of itself. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I often think about this, the ruling class really does try to split the ruling class, and splitting it along gender lines is one of those ways. If you're a worker and your coworker has an unplanned pregnancy and it's being forced to carry it to term, and you're not a person who has the possibility of becoming pregnant, that might introduce inequalities into the workforce that make that impinge on the unity of the class. Sometimes you find people trying to foment dissatisfaction among single childless workers for the idea that there's maternity leave. Why should they have maternity leave? They're choosing to have children. You hear that sometimes as if the benefits that are handed out selectively by the ruling class are used to divide us. I think it will become clear that this overturning of Roe v. Wade affects everybody. And it's not just women, it's also women's partners and families. It's a lot of people, and also communities are going to be affected by, in some cases, loss and death among women or people of reproductive age that are forced to undergo, risky pregnancies because they cannot get access to abortion care. So I think it will be, across the board a working class issue, and in the broadest possible meaning of the working class. Everyone who sells their labor power are, subject to some kind of restriction because of this law, this precedent being overturned. Thanks. Interesting question, Michael.
Antonio Leon, your mic is open. Antonio Leon, there you are.
All righty, thank you. First of all, Anita, I want to say, well, let me say, this is Antonio calling from Bowie, Maryland. I'm about 10 miles outside of DC, Prince George's County.
Thank you.
Anita, first of all, I loved your presentation. It was concise, very well delivered, and very informational. And I hope we can get a copy back so that I could share it on YouTube and in my social media platforms. As far as the struggle against the assault on democracy, I think that we need to always remember that the assault is old and it's going to continue. It's just going to get reformed and refined. And so we need to adapt and adjust as it adjusts moving forward. And in where I live, when I talk to people about voting, there's a lot of apathy out there. But I try to encourage them that voting is just the minimum that you can do. We need to organize and we need to follow up and force these politicians to do what we want them to do. So that's part of the organization, and I think that's very important because otherwise we're just we don't see what's going on. We're like those societal fish that can't discover that we are in a pervasive environment of water. That's all.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Antonio. That was really, thank you for your kind words about the presentation. And I will definitely, well, of course, this is being recorded and Dee will make those videos available to people who have registered. But I think you're right about that assault being continuous. And I think we did have a lot of surprises in 2016 about the way social media was used, for example. We weren't maybe up to answering that challenge in 2016, and one of our adaptations has to be to look into that. And you're right, voting is the minimum we can do. And there's some groups on the left, in fact, who don't want us to vote, who don't think voting matters. But voting, it takes 10 minutes. If you vote early in Ohio, it doesn't really take much time at all. It's nothing. And what we should be doing is going and registering other voters, demonstrating at our state house or at our elected officials' offices, calling our elected officials and holding them accountable to the promises they made. I was thinking this morning about Kirsten Sinema and how she ran a campaign promising a lowering of prescription drug prices. And then she turned right around and she's getting large donations from pharmaceutical companies, and she's just not followed through. And I think people have to really hold her accountable to the promises that she's made. And maybe the next person, if they really see accountability, will take a more serious approach to the promises that they make and what they're able to tell people. So I think, but you're right. We have to keep after people, and I don't know how to fight that apathy that you mentioned. I'm sure there are some good methods, but I think talking to people about what's on their mind, and if they were governor tomorrow, what would they do? And that's a way of getting people to think about what their desires are. Thank you, Antonio.
One more, Anita?
Okay, one more is good, Dee.
Oh, actually, if you want to make summary remarks, we don't have time for one more.
Well, let's. not sure I have summary remarks. So let's have one more. I don't know. Yeah, let's have one more. Question.
Giles, your mic is open. Giles or Giles. Definitely cannot pronounce your last name. Geetooah. There you are.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, good. Yeah, I'm Giles. You know how how the protests are going with getting unionizations and stuff. As much as I see good strides with Starbucks and Amazon, that still ain't gonna stop them from like undermining things later on. I just prop up like worker co-ops across the country and just put big corporate businesses out of businesses. I would rather I go with that approach. I know it's not going to solve every problem, but at least they won't be around to cause any more trouble for us either. And as for abortion, well, I learned something from this guy on Twitter, and he put it in an interesting way. Like, the whole idea behind abortion has nothing to do with morality. It's about changing the cogs of the machine. It's about keeping the labor force going, which I think is a very interesting point. I mean, let's be real. We see what both parties are for what they are. So I wouldn't put it past me if that even merits some truth to it at all.
Interesting. So they want to outlaw abortion to make more babies for the working class?
His mic is closed. We've got 3 minutes.
Okay, well, yeah, sorry. Well, thank you, Giles, for your comments. I agree that protests sometimes seem difficult. Worker co-ops, they're kind of the utopian socialism that you see sometimes. I can't remember. Eric Olin Wright is a sociologist who was very much involved in those kind of small utopias. Utopias being worker co-ops and things like that. I think they are good. I mean, they're not negative. I think there are some movements where those are useful, but the masses of industrial workers are not in those kind of small co-ops. And I think we need to think about that. And yes, keep the labor force going. Also, keep white babies getting born, I think, is another one of those subtexts that go on with this. So we do have to struggle. And I think, in terms of summary remarks, I think you have the discussion was really good. I appreciate everybody's ideas and questions, and I think it is good to think about these different categories of struggle, both in terms of how to, as Giles said, how to adapt to them or as they change. I think that was you, Giles. And I think those will be, that's an important strategy to keep in mind, that there are going to be new iterations of these struggles all the time. And we just have to be completely vigilant and tell the history of what, how we, and the, recognition that sometimes these elections do just mean just a handful of votes can change the Supreme Court, ultimately. So, but thank you all for your comments. I wrote down them as much as I could, take notes on them. And I look forward with you to reading what Tony has to say about the kind of the flip coin, the other side of the coin, how do working classes struggle for their democratic rights. I look forward to hearing what he has to say. And thank you so much. I look forward to hearing more of from other presenters in our series. And thank you again, Dee, for your organizing of this National Marxist School.
Thank you, Anita, for carrying the baton for this class. Thank everyone for participating. Remember to join us and invite others to join us Tuesday night this coming Tuesday night, May 10th, I believe it is, at 7:30 Eastern, and we'll be talking about, the class will concern the political economy of the United States. So again, Anita, thank you for carrying the baton for this class, and thank you everyone for participating. Please join us Tuesday night, Thursday night, and next Saturday for as we continue the this national Marxist School. So good afternoon and happy Mother's Day. Thank you, Anita.